Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Adam Bohlmeyer, and I'm the Education Coordinator and Fertility Clinic Liaison for the Embryo Adoption Awareness Center. This morning, we are very pleased to bring you the Donor Sibling Registry, helping people discover their roots. Joining us today, we are very pleased to welcome Ms. Wendy Kramer, who is the co-founder of the Donor Sibling Registry. The DSR is a charitable organization founded in 2000 by Ms. Kramer and her donor-conceived son, Ryan. Its mission is to assist individuals conceived as a result of sperm, egg, or embryo donation who are seeking to make mutually desired contact with others with whom they share genetic ties. Wendy is the author of Finding Our Families, a book written for donor-conceived people and their families. She's co-authored several published papers on donor conception and has reviewed abstracts for the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. Wendy and her son Ryan have appeared on the 60 Minutes show, the Oprah Winfrey Show, Good Morning America, and coming up on June 12th, she will be on the Katie Show as well. We are very pleased to have her this morning. But before we can jump into the presentation, we need to take care of a little bit of housekeeping. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation using the questions you submit through the Q&A feature. You may submit your questions at any time during the session, and we will answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, simply click on the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand portion of the screen. Type your question into the dialog box and then click the Send button. Now, if you happen to be in the full screen view, you can click on the question mark icon on the toolbar in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, and this will open a Q&A panel on your screen only. When you submit your question, it will be visible to all the panelists, but not visible to other attendees. We expect the presentation to last approximately 45 minutes, and we'll take the final 15 minutes for the Q&A session. We will be distributing a copy of today's presentation, as well as a comprehensive list of answers to all questions submitted today during the webinar. And as a note, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties for any reason, please contact WebEx Technical Support, and you'll see that number there at the bottom of the screen. It is 866-229-3239. And one final reminder, this presentation is being recorded today. And with that, I believe we are ready to begin our presentation. I'll throw it over to you, Wendy. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam. I'm so happy to be here, and hi, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about the Donor Sibling Registry, a little bit about our history, what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and what we've learned along the way. Next slide. So the DSR, we currently have a little more than 43,000 members, and that's donor-conceived people, their parents, prospective parents, egg donors, sperm donors, embryo donors, and others like the donor's parents or women who are thinking about using a donor, or other family members. We currently have, let's see, again, we have a little bit more than 43,000 members. Of those, we've matched more than 11,200, and that is donor-conceived people to either their half-siblings or to their donors. We have currently several hundred embryo donor families, and we have matched these embryo donor families with both half-siblings and donor-to-offspring matches. We have more than 100 postings from embryo families, and they're posted on around 65 facilities. So our mission is to educate, connect, and support donor families. Next slide. So before I go into our history, here's a picture. This is my son, Ryan, and these are three of the half-sisters that he knows. So he's met these three half-sisters. We know there's at least 9 out there, probably more like 20 or 30. But these are the 3 that he knows, and these are the families that we've spent time with. And I have to say that connecting with them has enriched all of our lives. It's been a really wonderful and positive experience. Next slide. So to talk about the DSR, we have to go back and talk a little bit about our history. So in 1990, I was married. My ex-husband was dealing with infertility issues, so we decided to go the donor route. And in 1990, May of 1990, my son Ryan was born. The year after, my husband and I split up, so I was then raising my son as an only parent. When he was 2 years old, he came to me and said, "So did my dad die or what?" Basically seeing other kids at preschool who had dads, he was a little confused. I was really sort of shocked to hear this from my 2.5-year-old, but it was great. We had a conversation about the sperm and the egg, and I went to a doctor who helped me have a baby, and it was the cornerstone conversation that then we would build on as he got older. So he was always a curious child, and by the time he was 6 years old, he was saying things like, "I want to know who my biological father is." So I was frustrated at first because I didn't know I wasn't prepared for, no one had counseled me about or educated me on this potential curiosity that children will have. And I think now, knowing what I know, I should have looked at more adoption research, because at that time I could have learned that many children who are brought up not knowing their genetic parents are indeed curious about them. So by the time Ryan was about 9, we had been told inadvertently from the sperm bank that he did indeed have half-brothers and sisters out there, children born from the same donor as him. And we thought, well, what if they want to know Ryan and Ryan wants to know them? There's no vehicle by which we can meet each other. What if Ryan's anonymous donor changed his mind or might be open to some kind of contact? We would never know that either. So in 2000, we started a Yahoo group. They were new at the time. It was a way to sort of reach people on the internet. And for the first couple of years, the site sat pretty quiet. And then after 2 years, I think we had like less than 40 members. But then we started getting media attention, and boom, once people knew that we were there, they started coming. So we had originally thought, wow, maybe Ryan isn't the only curious child out there. And it turns out he was not. So people started coming. We started getting media attention. Every time the media looked our way and put out a story, more and more people would come to the website. More and more people would get to connect with each other. In 2003, we did an Oprah, which put our numbers over the top. The Yahoo group could not handle it. We were matching by hand. And so in 2003, we organized as a charity organization, and we built a website. And that's the website that we currently have now. In 2005, we started doing public speaking. We started conducting research. We started connecting with academic institutions all over, starting with Cambridge University in the UK. And then, so that was in 05 and 06, and then the research has continued. Let's see, let's jump forward to some more recent progress. And so in 2011, we produced a documentary for the Style Network called Sperm Donor, and that was nominated for an Emmy. And just recently, in 2013, in December, we ran a 6-part docuseries for MTV called Generation Cryo that featured a donor-conceived 17-year-old girl connecting with her half-brothers and sisters, looking for her donor, and sort of looking at the issues that families and donor-conceived people face, where some parents were curious, some parents were afraid and nervous, some kids wanted to meet their donor, some kids didn't, and really took a good look at the relationships amongst the half-siblings. So if you guys can catch that, I definitely recommend it. Next slide. So again, we connect, support, and educate donor families, sorry. So the first part we want to look at is support. How do we support donor families? We have a Facebook group with over 1,000 members where there's a lot of chatting, and that seems to be lately where the chatting and discussions happen. We have over 6,000 members on our Yahoo discussion group, and that was the original DSR. Now we just use it for discussions. We have counseling. So we have licensed counselors available for people who need help maneuvering through the issues that a lot of us in donor families face. And we also do consulting, and I consult with people every day. I'm not a licensed counselor, but I've lived through it. I've heard from enough people. I've conducted the research, so I do consult with a lot of people on a daily basis. Next slide. In regards to connecting, again, we've connected more than 11,000 people. So the way that it works is that people come to the website. Anybody can search to see if they already have a match, look up their clinic and donor number. If you want to connect with people, you actually sign up, you add a posting, and then you can reach out to anyone else who signed up for your clinic and donor number. For those people that are born earlier than, say, the 1970s or 80s, when donor numbers came into being, because we have donor-conceived people born all the way back in the 40s, and people from other countries. We're a worldwide registry, so we have people coming from small clinics around the world. And a lot of people don't have the luxury of a donor number, but they still can find each other. It's not quite as easy. But if they have enough information in common, such as the doctor, the clinic, a time period, they can share photos. And if they suspect that they might be genetic relatives, they can put in for a DNA test. So everyone that connects on the DSR connects anonymously. So you decide when you want to share your personal information, like your email. Otherwise, you can share photos and emails and medical information with the people that you're genetically related to or the people your children are genetically related to while keeping your privacy. So basically, it's a win-win-win situation because the clinics and the sperm banks don't have to deal with this. We sort of take over and help the people connect. It's a win-win. The second win is the parents who get to share and update information, sometimes life-saving medical information with each other. And a win for the donor-conceived people who now have the option of being in contact and sort of defining for themselves what these genetic connections mean to them. Next slide. So education. So we are very busy educating the public at large, the reproductive medicine industry, and the donor families on our website. And we do this through producing surveys, conducting research, and then we've published, I don't know, somewhere between 12 and 15 academic papers. So I think the industry sort of takes that a little bit more seriously. It's not just anecdotal information, but also peer-reviewed academic information. And those are on our website on the research page. We present this research at conferences around the world. We do a ton of media stories. We do outreach programs to the LGBT community, the single mothers by choice community, infertility groups, and really what we're trying to do is to get people, you know, we've learned so much over the past 14 years, and myself included. My views of the more I learn, the more I see my views shifting. For example, back when my husband and I went to get pregnant, there was nothing but anonymous donors. I didn't know I had a choice. I didn't know why it might be important for my child to know about his origins and his medical background and his ancestry. So it's definitely been a shifting culture into more openness, and we'd like to keep educating people about that and about what the donor-conceived people have to say about that. For so long, the choices that us parents made were based on what we believe to be the best choices for ourselves, and we're trying to shift that conversation to be more about what's in the best interest of the child to be born, and I think sometimes those answers are very different. Next slide. So just coincidentally, this week I got an email from the mom of embryo donor children. And she said to me, here's just one of the lines that she said, "Holy smokes, I'm so dumb. I was focusing on the couple that donated the embryos. It never occurred to me that others would have used the same egg or sperm donor too. So my children could have half-siblings out there. So I think she, like many people, she was not properly educated or counseled about the potential curiosities that her children might have and who they might be related to. So this woman promptly contacted her clinic and said, I got the embryo from you. What is the sperm donor? Where did he come from? What's the sperm bank and the donor number? What's the egg clinic and the donor ID? Realizing, sort of, like a knock in the head, that this could be very important information. And that there might be other people currently on the Donor Sibling Registry that were already posted for the sperm or the egg donor. So I think a lot of recipients and donors are not properly educated and counseled on the difference between open versus anonymous donations. And so many of these choices that parents make are based on fear. They'd like to negate that the donor has importance and sometimes look at the donor as just a donated cell or a piece of genetic material, not realizing that for their children, it's one half of their DNA. It's where they come from. And just like in adoption, not everybody's going to be curious or have a burning desire to know, but many of these kids will have a desire to know, and many of them will really try and seek out to locate and connect with their sort of invisible donor family. Next slide. So some of the research we've done has been with donor-conceived people. So we asked 751 donor-conceived people what were the reasons for participating in the Donor Sibling Registry? Why were they reaching out to their genetic relatives? And we can see that, and these people could answer obviously more than one question here, but the two largest answers were they wanted to know what the donor looked like, and they wanted to connect with their half-siblings. Also, many of them wanted to know more about their ancestry, wanted to know more about themselves, wanted to know more about their medical history. And again, it's about defining their identity. Who am I? Part of knowing who you are is knowing where you come from. And a little more than a third of them said they would like to establish a relationship with the donor. Next slide. So we've done research on both sperm donors and egg donors. So there's one reason that we know sharing and updating medical information is very important. And we've had some life-saving stories on the Donor Sibling Registry. So maybe you and your clinic contact, your donors more often, but what we found in our research is that 84% of sperm donors and 97% of our surveyed egg donors had never been contacted for medical updates. So when these parents get a donor profile, it's a snapshot. It's a picture of one day in the life of a healthy donor. We don't know what happens the next day. We don't know what happened to the donor's father the next week, if somebody got diabetes or a heart condition or a cancer. So it's not a very complete health picture, getting a snapshot one day in the life of a healthy donor. So of these sperm donors and egg donors that were never contacted for medical updates, we can see almost a quarter of the sperm donors and almost a third of the egg donors did feel like they or close family members had a medical issue that would be important to share with the families. We didn't ask the egg donors this, but 94% of our surveyed sperm donors said they would have accepted an offer for genetic testing if it would have been offered. Next slide. So to focus in a little bit on the importance of sharing and updating medical information, here are two quotes from parents with some pretty serious health issues that would be very important to share and update with the donor, as the donor may have children of his own or her own someday, as well as the other parents of children that might already be out there. Next slide. So there is very little regulation or oversight in regards to medical testing. The FDA does monitor some things, mostly communicable diseases, and some of these other diseases. So what we're finding is that some clinics and sperm banks test some donors for some of these issues, like cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs, and these are all diseases that we've had reported on the Donor Sibling Registry, so we know that not everybody is testing for all of these. Excuse me, next slide. So I think we need to be focusing more on donor-conceived people. For so long, it's been about a parent's right to get pregnant and a clinic's right to sell sperm or eggs and a donor's right to remain anonymous. But I think we need to be shifting our focus to the people born from donor sperm and eggs and embryos. So a lot of these children and adults are, and I guess, again, just like in adoption, some have a mild curiosity, some have no curiosity. They say, you know what, I have my parents, I'm good, I don't need to know anything else. But some have a burning desire, like the boy in this picture. And I think a lot of infertility organizations focus only on the telling, that once you tell your child, then everything will be fine. You don't really have to deal with it. And we know at the Donor Sibling Registry that telling is just the beginning of the story. Next slide. So we know that telling opens up the possibility of curiosity. So we need to be telling our children early. We need to be then not minimizing the donor or donors. We need to be honoring our children's curiosities and letting them know that it's okay to be curious if they are. If they're not, that's fine too. But a lot of donor-conceived people that I talk to are really afraid to talk about this, especially around their non-biological parent. And that's why we'd like to see better education, especially for the non-bio parents in egg donation, sperm donation, and embryo donation. To know that they really need to honor their children's curiosities and look at how can they serve their children best, sort of putting their own fears and hesitations to the side. Next slide. So we have learned so much from the adoption world. Adam and I were just talking this morning about how, there are, at this point in time, after decades of really forward movement, no one in the adoption community would ever be counseled to not tell their children the truth about being adopted. Well, the donor conception community, we are not there yet. Many parents are still counseled to never tell the children, never tell their families. We have this opportunity where the adoption community has come so far in all of these decades, and we have them right there, and we can learn so much from them because it's so parallel, donor conception and adoption. We could be learning about not just disclosure, but honoring a person's desire to know about where they come from, their ancestry, their genetics, their medical background. So, and also from the adoption community about dealing with grief and loss, dealing with infertility, grieving over not being able to have your own biological child so you don't pass along that grief to your child or that shame to your child, which is what we see when parents don't sufficiently sort of process through those feelings around infertility. Next slide. So a lot of decisions that we see from parents are made out of fear, like specifically the choice to use an anonymous donor. So parents sometimes feel it's safer. I won't have to deal with the donor. My child will never have an option to know the donor. It will be safer. And this is usually in heterosexual couples and usually trying to protect the non-bio parent. So it's a decision made out of fear. Sometimes it's in LGBT and single mothers by choice too, as they also have fears about what this connection might be and fear of the donor and what the donor what kind of role the donor might play in a child's life. I know with LGBT families, there's also the legal issues and different states sort of defining parentage differently. And sometimes for people, it's about insecurity about their own parenting. They're afraid if they meet a donor that, the donor might be a better parent or their kids might like them more. So I think our focus needs to shift from parents' hesitations or fears, focus on really educating these parents about why having an open donor is so important and what the offspring's needs are. We have this research. We have tons of anecdotal stories. We have a success story page on the Donor Sibling Registry where people can read about parents who were hesitant, who connected anyway, and what happened. So I think there's a ton of research out there, and we need to be pointing parents to it before the fact, parents and donors, before the donors donate and before the parents conceive. Next slide. So I guess I sort of just went through a lot of this. So I think beforehand, when donor recipients are being counseled, they need to really acknowledge and work through the fears so that they're not making the decisions from a place of fear, but from a place of being fully educated on the matters. And again, really looking at the question, well, they should be aware that the decisions they're making now may be made out of their own fears or insecurities. These decisions are going to affect their children for the rest of their lives. So we need to more be asking, again, what's in the best interest of the child to be born? And the parents need to really own the responsibility of working through the feelings of loss or pain surrounding infertility, surrounding not being able to have a biological child. I think that's one of our jobs as parents, is to work through that so that we don't pass that along to our children. Next slide. So there are many benefits of being connected. There are the medical reasons. There are just children being able to connect with other children who share that invisible side of themselves. Children oftentimes have a stronger bond with their parents when the parents are partners with them in searching for and connecting with their half-siblings or donors. I think connecting sort of can seem frightening and can seem like, oh my God, what's going to happen, especially when there's 10 or 20 or 50 half-siblings out there. But I think the more that you read, the more you see how much control you have over these connections, and also how to really make them positive and how to move forward so that it's a really positive experience for your children. I'm going to point you again to the docuseries Generation Cryo, which can be watched on the MTV website, because it shows, and it's why we picked this group of families, it shows donor-conceived children with many different feelings about connecting, and their parents with many different feelings, including fear. And it's a really good educational tool to see all the different ways that parents feel and how they might work through those feelings. Okay, next slide. So from our research, one of the key findings is the medical issues. So the importance of being able to update and share medical information. We know that medical record keeping is inadequate, that most sperm and egg donors are not contacted for updates. When sperm donors have tried to call in information, the sperm bank doesn't keep the information. We know this because we've had families call in after a sperm donor and they're told, nope, we have no updated information. And I think because there's no oversight, no regulation, the sperm banks are, like people have said, it's a wild west. They can basically do whatever they want to. I think they have their own liability as their first, as the reason that they do everything. It's not really what's in the best interest of the families. It's about keeping their own liabilities down. So we think it's really important that somebody come in and there's some kind of oversight about the medical issues. We know that when you have information about a family's medical history, you're much better prepared for preventative care, like screenings and testing and that kind of thing. And you can also be mindful of early signs of diseases. We know that early diagnosis can lead to early treatment. So updating and sharing medical information is really important. Next slide. So we know, we've kind of gone through this, the importance of education. So the importance of counseling and educating parents before donation and conception. We know that 20, 50, or 100 kids from a donor can be very challenging for families. The infertility industry has said that random meetings are statistically impossible. We know they happen all the time. We hear the stories all the time. We have, they're the groups of 100, 150. We have one group that's approaching 200. There are medical issues in these large groups because the sperm banks don't know how many kids are out there, who they are. So when there are medical emergencies, they can't even reach all the families to tell them about the medical emergency. So there's a huge need for accurate record keeping. And again, disclosure is not the end of the story. We need to educate parents about the importance of honoring and acknowledging children's curiosities and partnering with them to reach out to donor relatives if that's what they want to do. Okay, next slide. So again, and that leads into the importance of connecting. So it's important for everyone to connect. Sometimes we have parents that are connecting. We have now about 25 egg clinics who are actually writing the DSR into their contract. So it's giving the donors and the recipients an opportunity to connect right from the get-go. And they do that on the DSR. They can do it anonymously if they want. Basically, it's empowering them to decide how much contact they want, the level of contact, and even when they'll share personal contact information with each other. So they can share photos, medical information, emails, all while remaining anonymous to each other until they're ready, or if they're ever ready to share, their personal contact information for each other, with each other. So it's also important for parents to know the importance of early disclosure and a child's right to know. I think we've learned that a lot from the adoption community too, that early disclosure is better, and we advise to tell right from the get-go. So, like for instance, when people ask my son, what was it like when you found out you were donor conceived? He's answered, well, what was it like when you found out you had blonde hair? So basically, it's just a part of him. It's a part that he's always known about. He honestly doesn't remember ever being told. It's just been a part, he's a rock climber, he has blonde hair, he's donor conceived, and he's an aerospace engineer. So it's just all part of who he is. And I think also another thing to talk about are that donors should not be promised anonymity. In this age of DNA and Google, the donors that are still promised anonymity and not fully educated about DNA testing and how donor-conceived people can find their donors, I think that's remiss of clinics who don't fully educate their donors about that when giving them a choice to be open or anonymous. There is no such thing as promising 100% anonymity these days, and I can vouch for that. My son was the first donor-conceived child in 2005 to actually figure out who his donor was through DNA testing. Next slide. So what we think should happen, if I made the rules, I think that there should be mandatory counseling, third-party counseling, not through the clinic, not through the sperm bank, third-party counseling for all prospective donors and parents. They should make fully educated and informed decisions about what they're stepping into. We also think that there should be tracking of all recipients, donors, and births. We know now that the sperm banks have absolutely no idea of how many kids are out there born for any one donor. We know also for in the egg donation world, we had actually 45% of sperm donor parents and 42% of egg donor parents were never even asked to report their birth spec. So when these agencies say that they do track births, how can that be so when 42% of our surveyed parents said they were never even asked to report their birth spec? And some of those parents did report, some of those didn't. There should be genetic testing for donors. There should be oversight that, you know, not just suggestions for medical testing, but really some regulation that comes in and says what kind of genetic and medical testing should happen. And there should be, you know, along with tracking the number of births, first we need to track, accurately track how many children are born for any one donor. Then we need to give serious thought for what kind of limits need to be put on the groups of half-siblings. Is it fair to have a child with 150 half-siblings out there? What are the psychosocial ramifications? What are the medical ramifications? Okay, next slide. And again, we need to require the donors to regularly update the medical information, and that needs to be shared with the family. You know, many of these donors will go on to have children of their own. The information from children from their donations is very important for them to know about. We also think that there should be follow-up health histories of egg donors. We did research on 155 egg donors that definitely pointed in the direction of follow-up health histories of the egg donors for OHSS and secondary infertility, things like that. Just part of making a more responsible and ethical industry going forward. And also, a lot of donors contact me and say, I'm curious, I want to make myself available to my offspring, but do I have any legal or financial obligations? Do I have any rights or responsibilities? I donated through a clinic or a sperm bank, and you know, I've read in the news about all of these you know, lawsuits between donors and families, and I tell them everything you read about in the news, the lawsuits, it's all private donations, known donors. If you donated through a clinic or a sperm bank, you have no rights or responsibilities, and it's safe for you to come forward and make connections. So we'd like donors also educated more about that. Next slide. So, you know, the biggie for us is ending donor anonymity, and the industry is definitely not in agreement about that. You know, and as always, that always comes down to money. It's all about money. So in my opinion, they're putting money before ethics. And we even, Ryan and I had a meeting with California Cryobank, and we said to them, you guys are the biggest in the industry. You have an opportunity to lead the way into a more ethical future, end donor anonymity. Don't offer any anonymous donors. And they said, we agree with you, we think you're right, but we just can't do it because of business. So again, you know, it just comes down to money. They feel like they would make more money. And we're hoping someday it will switch, and they'll switch over to, like many other countries have done, ending donor anonymity. Almost 3/4 of our 751 surveyed donor-conceived people recommended not using an anonymous donor. One of them saying, I think that a donor who is willing to be known is extremely important. At the very least, a donor-conceived child should have genetic and medical information available. And I hear from too many parents that say that used anonymous donors who now have curious kids and they can't get answers, and they say, why didn't my clinic or doctor tell me back then that this would be an issue? And they feel very guilty about it, myself included. I wish I would have known more and made more educated decisions 24 years ago when I got pregnant. Okay, and now for our last slide. So one way to properly educate potential donors and parents is to have them read our new book. It basically takes all of the articles and information and testimonials and research and academic papers and everything that we've learned over the last 14 years, and we put it all in one book. So instead of sending people to our website because they could read for days there, we put it all in a book. And it's basically, we're not hitting anyone over the head with any one of these, theories about anonymity or whatever. We're giving them information, lots of quotes and stories from families. We feel that the best way to educate people is through listening to the stories of people who have walked this path before them. So I would definitely recommend the book to anyone considering donor conception, egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, and also for people to use as a manual. I wish I had this book when my son was 2 and said to me, did my dad die or what? It would have been really helpful. Or when he was 6 and said, I want to know my biological father. So so that's that, and I think I'm done, and I look forward, to you guys having any questions and chatting a little bit. So thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Wendy. That was fantastic. As Wendy mentioned, we are ready to move into our question and answer session. So as a reminder, if you do have any questions for Wendy, go ahead and submit them now using the Q&A feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And just a quick reminder as we move into the Q&A session, we do have several webinars coming up that I want to point out. On May 21st, that's a Wednesday, we are hosting a special evening session of the Affordable and Accessible Adoption Choice. And this is a webinar that if you have any clients who would be interested potentially in embryo donation and adoption, I would encourage you to invite them to this event. The webinar essentially gives a broad overview of the process of embryo donation and adoption through a presentation, and as we do at the end of every webinar, we'll answer any questions and answers your clients may have about this process. And then next month, on the 11th of June, which is also a Wednesday, we'll be hosting the fundamentals of embryo donation and adoption. I believe that we actually have a different webinar then, so we'll correct that and give information to you about that. Wendy, we have seen a couple of questions come in. Just to start, if anyone out there is interested in being on the Donor Sibling Registry, whether it be a donor or a donor-conceived person, how can they do that?
Yeah, they would just come to DonorSiblingRegistry.com. Again, you don't have to be a member to search the site, to read the articles. You could even look up and see if you have any matches already posted. If posting is something you want to do, we do charge a yearly fee of $75 or a permanent membership of $175, so you never have to pay again. Like I said, we're a charity. We're not funded by any organization, anybody outside, so these are the funds that help us to keep going and connecting people and growing. So yeah, I invite people to come, and before you decide to be a member, like I said, you can spend days reading our materials.
Excellent.
Okay. You want me to read some questions here?
Yeah, if you've had any that have come in, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. So let's see. The first question I see here is, how has the DSR been received by donors? And I have to say really positively once their fears are abated. So at the beginning, I think I said this, the industry said, you'll never have donors come to the site. They've all been promised anonymity. And we started to have donors come to the site early on saying, promised anonymity? Nobody gave us a choice. And of course we're curious. So we have a lot of donors. We have more than 2,000 donors now on the DSR who are willing to make contact. And that's anything from just sharing information, medical information, maybe a photo, to really connecting, redefining family, and sort of figuring out relationships with these children, with their parents, with adult donor-conceived people. So we've had a really positive response by these donors that have been able to connect with their genetic offspring. This kind of goes into the second question. Are there any negative consequences for seeking to know your genetic family members? If so, what would you say those are, and how can we seek to overcome them? It's kind of a funny question, and recently we taped a Katie Couric show featuring an egg donor who meets her donor-conceived daughter, who's 16, and her parents for the first time. And Katie asked that question. You know, I'm sure all of these meetings are not happy like this one. And I have to say, you know, and the way I answered it on her show was to say, you know, think of your Thanksgiving dinner and look around the table at your family. Do you get along with all of them? Do you want to hang out with all of them? And the answer, you know, usually is no. So sometimes these connections, when you have a lot in common, maybe when you live closer to each other, you know, they're really amazing connections, like we have in our family sometimes. But if there isn't a lot in common, or maybe the personalities don't mesh, you know, you might still be interested in knowing them and knowing about them and keeping in touch with them, but you might not want to have them as your best friend. So I think, as in any traditional family, these family connections are no different. Some people you connect with with a very strong bond, and some not so much, just because you don't, you know, you're not on the same wavelength as they are. So let's see. Oh, and also I talk a lot about that in my book. There's a whole chapter on bumps in the road, like what to do if you have a connection and somebody pulls back, or you connect with your donor and then you don't hear from him, or you don't like your child's half-siblings' parents, or, you know, the bumps in the road that we're all going to face at one time or another. So let's see. We have another question here. What progress has been made in the area of ending donor anonymity? Where do you see the issue going in the next 25 years? I do think, I think I mentioned this, in other countries, they've asked publicly, what is in the best interest of the child to be born? And when these countries ask the question like that, focusing on the children that are being born, many of them, parts of Australia and New Zealand and the UK and I can't think. There's probably, I think, 10 or 12 countries who have banned donor anonymity, because I think they look at what is in the best interest of the child, and it's not bringing a child into the world who will never have a chance to know their one half of their genetic background, one half of their medical history. So I do see us heading in that direction. I think we haven't so far, because of organizations like SART and the ASRM, who anytime there's been any kind of proposed regulation of the industry, limiting the number of children per donor, accurately tracking through a registry, ending donor anonymity, they squelch it right from the get-go. And the ASRM is very big, very powerful. They have lobbyists in Washington, and I think that's why we haven't made any progress here in the U.S. on that front. Not that I think we won't, because I think in the end what's ethical and responsible will always win out. I think that we just have to keep listening to the donor-conceived people. We need to keep conducting the research and churning out the academic papers, and hopefully eventually the pendulum will start to swing more looking at the rights of donor-conceived people, or at least having their rights included in the conversation. So looking at what's in the best interest of the industry, the parents, the donors. Sure, I think they all belong in the conversation, but the missing voice has been the voice of donor-conceived people, and I'm under the opinion that their voice should not only be included in the conversation, but you know, first up in the conversation. They're the people who, you know, all of these decisions that we're making and the regulation or lack of, the oversight, it affects their lives directly. So we really do need to be listening much more to the people conceived this way.
I don't see any other questions on my end. Have you had any come through to you, Wendy?
I'm looking. I don't see any other questions.
All right. Well, if that's the case, then I believe we're ready to end our event for the day. Ms. Kramer, thank you so much for being here and sharing your research and something that you're so passionate about in this issue. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
With that, we will end our event. Be sure to look out for the DSR on the Katie Couric Show coming up on June 12th, and we will also look forward to seeing you at future Awareness Center webinar events. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Adam.